Hello everyone and welcome to today's webinar, Gaining a Mental Edge, How VitaCholine Activates the Mind and Propels the Body, brought to you by Balchem. In this webinar, Tom Druke and Ciappio will present insights on how choline supports your body and mind in sports nutrition, as well as an overview of supporting science. Before we get started, I have some housekeeping points to go over. If you have any questions for us, please type them into the Q&A box on the webinar screen and hit the submit button. If you experience any technical difficulties while watching the webinar, please refresh your browser, as this clears up most problems. If this doesn't help, just type your issue into the Q&A box and a member of our technical team will help you. Finally, you should see a resources panel on your screen where you can access useful documents and links relating to today's topic. So now we're going to start our first presentation with Tom. Over to you, Tom.
Thank you very much, Natasha. Pleasure to be with everyone. And today, obviously, we're here to talk about the VitaCholine brand and how choline itself can make a big difference. So what I'll be walking through is a little bit of an introduction into the company. I'm going to take us through some insights and maybe talk through a few concepts that will lead into Eric then walking through what's choline, how does it relate to brain health, some of the things it does with both physical and optimal metabolic health, what are the intakes looking like, do we get enough, and then we'll go through some Q&A. So with that, I'm going to launch into a little bit of a discussion on your sponsor, Balchem, the company Eric and I both work for. Balchem is a large company that is focused on really creating solutions for health. Our Human Nutrition and Health division is just under $1 billion in sales as of 2022. And we've got a large number of manufacturing sites. You can see 22 around the country, as well as 6 technology centers. We're centered and headquartered in Montville, New Jersey, and we're really focused on sustainability and making the world a healthier place. That's our true mission, and that includes both customers, suppliers, of course, our employees, our communities, and the shareholders anywhere we live and work. Among our brands, we really are focusing today on minerals and nutrients that really help nourish the future. Of course, the focus of today is going to be the essential brain nutrient VitaCholine, but you can see we also have K2 Vital and Opti MSM, which have just joined Balchem as of 2023, will be their first full year in the company. And Albion Minerals and VitaSure are 2 other brands that we have within the portfolio that really help drive nutritional solutions. We like to think of ourselves, and you know, one of the ways I'd like everyone else to think of us is really an outsourced resource for our customers. From the start, in terms of when you're developing a product or thinking through the types of applications and starting to innovate and get your product into market, all the way up through that point where you're launching and you need support with perhaps insights, consumer trends, the types of things you do to promote your product post-launch. We really do have the capabilities, expertise, and the solutions to help you get to market faster, both in food, beverages, and in supplements. So today, our focus is really on a trend that Mintel brought up as one of their 2023 trends for the future of food, and that is staying sharp. If you think about the challenges that we've gone through in the pandemic, the pace of life has just kept accelerating. And of course, along with that, the demands on people. If you think about a consumer's point of view, people move from crisis to crisis. They're stretched in so many different directions, thinking about things like the climate crisis, the overall geopolitical unrest, still lingering issues around the pandemic and energy crisis. These are just some of the things that people have to face, as well as their everyday day-to-day life. This really results in some challenges to mental health and well-being. And here we have some UK survey data that came out, which looked at overall mental health and well-being statistics in 2023. And this was a sample size of just over 4,000 individuals, which said about a little over 75% of people are experiencing stress, and just around 60% both anxiety and depression. So these demands that people are facing are beginning to have an impact, and that means that people are looking for solutions. So one of the first things that people are seeking solutions with is staying sharp around the issue of fatigue. 42% of workers say that they're burned out, and that's much more likely to impact women, particularly given the multiple demands that they typically have, both in work and outside of work. We have stress and anxiety. 71% of consumers in the UK are saying that I try to manage my stress with diet and exercise. So nutrition is a big part of how people look at how they can solve stress. Brain performance. This isn't just the traditional memory or focus. This is much more, how can I really find solutions either in the food, beverage, or supplement area to really help contribute to my overall mental and physical health, my emotional well-being. And then as people get older, it's not uncommon to see issues around and facing, how to preserve that cognitive function. 49% of people are doing things like brain games, whereas 44%, just a few less, are taking supplements as a preventative measure for that issue of healthy aging. So really a lot of different ways and a lot of different angles that people can take for how to stay sharp in this challenging environment. So the facets that can take in market can be from relaxation all the way to energy. And you see lots of new entrants have come out within the energy drinks. They continue to be popular. And we're seeing a little bit more of a transition to beverages that are tailored really to the need of the moment. So energy is just kind of I want to have that burst and really maintain my energy regardless of what I'm doing. But more and more, we're seeing launches of beverages that are focused on, like Peak, you see the beverage here, has a calm and a mental acuity. So really focusing in on, I want a beverage for when I want to be focused and want to be active and at my peak. And then I want to be able to relax and calm down when I don't. We're also seeing a lot of trends towards nutritional products tailored just for kids. A couple of examples here with Brainiac and Ripple plant-based milk, which have included choline and DHA as ways to help boost cognition among children. We also see a lot of functional crossover. You're seeing more increasingly claims for immunity or brain health on actual food products, where that's allowed and appropriate. And athletic greens you see pictured here, again, a lot of different options that are kind of blurring those lines between what's a food and what's in a supplement. Either way, people are looking for more solutions. We do also see a lot around healthy lifestyle. And again, looking at the beverage category, things like antioxidants, kefir, yerba mate, all of these things that are coming on trend and really have a very close associated, either with digestion or with brain boost or immunity. And then finally, sports nutrition is resurging, and we see a big demographic appeal here. A lot of brands such as Ghost and G Fuel you see pictured here are really focusing in on that lifestyle image and things that you can do in the moment to really drive your performance, for example, in gaming. Not only are consumers seeking momentary and in the moment solutions, but they're also looking for solutions throughout all stages of life. We've already seen in some prior research we've done exactly how brain building for a brighter future plays out. As the brain really increases in size from birth through age 6, choline has a tremendous impact. That's not the focus of our talk today, but we've seen a lot of interest there as well. In terms of as you get older and get into middle of life, brain health issues do impact more than 8 to 10 Americans, and that's where people want to get the most out of their brain. And then, as I said earlier, as people become concerned as they age and cognitive decline becomes an issue, then we see preserving peak performance as a great way to offer a solution in the marketplace. Consumers are seeking solutions in both supplements and food. And I'm going to take a moment here just to walk through the picture you're seeing on your left, which is in 2020, one a day, building on some strength that the Mega Food brand had initially launched Choline into the marketplace. And the one a day brought it relatively mainstream by launching a Choline, what we call sidecar, a pill that was put in alongside the traditional prenatal vitamin to add brain support boost and under the prenatal advanced. And the effect we saw in market was pretty striking. Within the first year, $7 million of sales, up to, as we got into the end of 21 and a full year 21, about 34 million of the overall sales of the prenatal segment were through a SKU containing choline. So we know that when there's a solution that is scientifically validated, it can really impact the retail sales segment and really help manufacturers grow and increase their sales. We also understand that there's plenty of additional opportunities beyond the prenatal segment. If you look here, for example, you see on the left hand, the lighter blue is millennials and the darker blue is baby boomers. And among the top concerns for millennials are brain health, energy, stress and anxiety relief. If you look at the brain health section, which is in green, you'll also see that's a major concern for baby boomers. So this makes it a really good bridge category where you can appeal to both millennials and baby boomers with a similar claim. And honestly, someone is going to capitalize on these opportunities. So why shouldn't you be the one to do that? We also know from research coming out of Mintel that consumers really are seeking solutions that have proven science. As cognition comes mainstream, it's really going to be those well-known ingredients that can validate with scientific research their cognitive performance claims. Regulatory claims in this category tend to be fairly uncommon, but they're definitely starting to increase. And you'll see a lot more structure function claims in that area, or in the EU, obviously the EFSA claims. But brands have to be transparent and educate consumers about that. Here's a good example of a brand that's done that. White Wolf Smart Energy, which is in Australia. This has gained a lot of trust, and they do it through nutrients backed by science. So really focusing on here, L-theanine, which has some interesting science, caffeine, vitamins B6 and B12, and the positioning here as great while training, gaming, or working. So making it a much more broad positioning so that it's for overall mental health and well-being. One of the things we've done internally, as I kind of hark back to things that Balchem can offer, is we've taken a look at concepts both in a line, such as you see here. We did create a line of products for testing called Mind Fuel, which looked at multiple formats. And you see here a recharge tip-in, which was used for replenishing mental energy, amplify bars, which were much more about boosting your performance in the moment, and then calibrate and soothe, which are a little bit more focused on activating the mind or soothing the mind. So really, these are the kinds of concepts that we like to look at, both in a line as you see here. And we do have, certainly results on some of these. I'll give results on the next two I'm going to present. But these are actually definitely products where if you'd like to have more conversation, just reach out to us. One particular one that I wanted to bring up is a recent beverage concept that we did, which was a level up carbonated ready-to-drink beverage, focused in on that serious gamer target. It included a gram of VitaCholine to really capitalize on a research that Eric is going to talk to you about. And the results we saw were pretty compelling. Versus a control level energy beverage, what we saw was a statistically significant increase in purchase interest and believability, whereas not quite as strong on uniqueness. However, we did do another one that was focused really on how do you translate these results for perhaps a little bit of an older demographic. And we did some things called Boost You, which were powdered booster packs for consumers who are really health conscious and looking for solutions in different areas like cognition, immune health, healthy aging, or sleep and digestive health. And so the idea here is a boost that you can put into your your smoothie or your afternoon shake. And again, this one actually had very strong results in believability, while also seeing good directional increases in purchase interest and uniqueness. So we've kind of got a lot of the trends and insights that you see driving us to put these consumer solutions out there. And then we're really trying to translate that into products that people can use and really will be able to move in the marketplace. So with that kind of backdrop, what I'd like to do now is hand it over to Eric Ciappio, and he's going to take us through the science. So Eric, I'll pass it over to you.
All right. Thanks, Tom. So my name is Eric Ciappio. I'm with the nutrition science team here at Balchem, and I'm here to talk to you about choline. So choline is really interesting, and it's actually the most recently established essential nutrient, just only established as essential by the Institute of Medicine in the US in 1998, so just 25. So what does it do? Really, you can sort of break down choline's job into three basic functions, and we like to think of it as like a super transporter. I mean, it's moving things around the body, right? So what does that mean specifically? That's things as sort of deep in the weeds as moving methyl groups to help support gene expression and overall cellular function. That comes in the form of helping to move fat out of the liver to help support energy metabolism. And that even, of course, as we're talking about brain health, it helps to transport signals across the brain and nervous system to regulate functions such as mood, memory, and attention. So when you zoom out a little bit further, what does that mean in terms of the overall health benefit areas? As you might have guessed, of course, brain health is almost chief among them, arguably, in terms of what choline does, metabolic health overall, and then what we'd call sort of general wellness nutrient content. Like I said, as choline is an essential nutrient, it's part of the royal family, we like to say, meaning that it does play an essential, integral part of maintaining a healthy diet overall. And then when you get a little bit more specific, like what does that mean for me? Why do I care? I mean, there's a lot of specific benefits to ensuring that you have adequate choline in your diet. I mean, these benefits range from being essential for overall brain and nervous system function, to be involved in the regulation of memory and mood, helping to support specific aspects like muscle control. And we'll see a really good example of that in practice in a little bit. Supporting overall cognitive performance, supporting nitric oxide production to help support healthy blood flow, and of course, fat metabolism. So lots of specific examples for you and I that are really tangible things that we experience in our day-to-day lives. So let's dig into a little bit about brain health specifically. As we said before, choline plays a very critical role in overall brain and muscle function. The reason is because choline, as you might guess by the name, is an integral part of a neurotransmitter called acetylcholine, which is effectively just major half choline and a part of an acetyl group attached to that. And that neurotransmitter is what physically transmits messages down the nervous system to help control specific messages, such as overall muscular control. And this transport of acetylcholine across these synapses is what is actually making the muscles move, right? This is the trigger to tell your muscles to move. Choline also has important roles in overall cognitive structure and function as well. And I think a really great example of this comes from an epidemiological cohort study from about 10 years ago. There's a couple other examples of this, but this is just one of my personal faves. This comes from the Framingham study, and what they did was they looked at a group of people from this cohort, and they looked at specific markers of brain structure and, of course, brain function as it related to choline intake. What you can see here on the screen on the left is something called white matter hyperintensity volume, and this is sort of a marker of poor brain health in essence. It's overall linked to poor cognitive function and brain atrophy. And what you can see is that in the graph on the right-hand side, as choline intake goes up, you see the amount of hyperintensity volume goes down, which is a good thing, right? So in other words, higher choline intake is associated with better brain structure overall in this cohort of adults. Now, what does that mean functionally, right? I can't necessarily see inside my own brain and look at the level of white matter hyperintensity volume. So why would I care? Well, higher choline intake was also linked to specific markers of overall cognitive performance, things like verbal and visual memory, for example. In both cases, across multiple measures of each, you can see that as choline intake goes up, performance and memory also goes up. So a really great association between them, and it really dovetails nicely with what was seen in terms of the structural benefits of adequate choline intake as well. But that's all fine and well. We in the dietary supplement and food industries love cohort data and epidemiological data, of course, but what really moves, where the rubber really sort of meets the road, as it were, is in randomized controlled trials. I think this is a really, really great example. So in this study, this was a randomized double-blind placebo-controlled trial in which the group here compared placebo to choline bitartrate, which is one of the forms of our VitaCholine product. And they took this group, separated them into this group of healthy young men and women, separated them to receive one of the two different interventions, then followed them periodically for about 2 hours or so. And then they tested them for specific markers, things like blood pressure, mood and arousal, and overall looked at performance on a visual motor task. We'll dive into that a little bit. So what they were specifically looking for was something called a motoric aiming task. And this was basically, you could think of this as an e-gaming assessment. It's a point and click test. And what they wanted to see was their performance on this overall point and click test, right? How close to the target did they get? How fast did they move? I mean, basic things like accuracy and reaction time. But the really interesting thing, and what I personally like about this study a lot, it wasn't just a simple performance test. What they also measured was a really rapid acting sort of surrogate marker for choline bioavailability. And the way they did that was with pupil size assessment. The hypothesis being that since pupil size control is what's called a cholinergic function, meaning that it's dependent on choline-dependent neurons, the idea is that the more constricted the pupil means more cholinergic activation, which means more choline, of course, is actually being utilized. So what did this mean in terms of overall performance? You can see that things like accuracy and reaction time were significantly improved in the choline group relative to the placebo group. And you can also see that the number of misses, the errors, was also significantly decreased. So overall performance improved significantly on this e-gaming type task among these subjects. I should also mention this is within 70 minutes, so just over an hour after supplementation, so very fast acting. And the neat thing was you can see really nice differences between the two groups here. The choline group had significant decreases in pupil size fairly quickly. I mean, this is within 20 to 40 minutes. You see some significant changes. Whereas in the placebo group, sort of hovers around really no change, largely for the entire 2-hour duration. And then you can also see that this performance, their performance markers on the bottom graph were significantly correlated with that pupil size change. So overall, we can conclude from this that choline supplementation improved accuracy and reaction time by increasing nervous system activation. So really, really neat study. Choline also plays lots of important roles. It's not just, of course, supporting your performance on e-gaming applications. I mean, choline has, as Tom sort of alluded to earlier, lots of really great data on supporting cognitive development in infants. I would love, if anyone's interested, to talk about this. Tons of new data just in the last year and a half or so. But of course, for you and I, for adults, it's essential for normal brain and nervous system function, and also does play an essential role in memory and regulating mood. Switching gears a little bit, I mean, we did talk in the beginning about how choline does play a role in transporting fats in the liver, and how do we know that? So what does this mean? So choline also helps to generate something called phosphatidylcholine. Again, as the name might imply, it's a very heavy, choline-heavy molecule, and it really plays two roles. Number one is by forming the physical architecture of cell membranes all around the body, in the liver and the brain in particular. And it also helps to transport lipids throughout the body to help support fat metabolism. There's a lot of different applications of this, which I'd love to go into, but we'll keep it brief here. The way that we know this is by what's called a depletion-repletion study. For those of you who've been around this space for some time, we all know, of course, about the virtues of the randomized controlled trial, but the ones that are really in the know that depletion-repletion studies are sort of the cornerstone of how we know that nutrients are essential. And the way it works is essentially you take a group of people who are otherwise healthy and you deplete their diet of nutrient X, in this case choline. So you basically remove choline from the diet and then you gradually replete them over time. And what you're looking for is what happens, right? What happens when we take choline out of someone's diet? You can see that overall, from that choline deficiency diet, you see that just over 2/3 of them did develop some form of choline deficiency, right? And when they did observe some form of choline deficiency, among 95% of these participants, they had liver dysfunction, right? So either liver dysfunction alone, or in about 2/3 of cases, or liver and muscle dysfunction in the case of about 1/4 of them, leaving 5% with just some form of muscle dysfunction. And the way they know this is by looking at specific biomarkers of liver dysfunction, right? So what you can see here on the graph on the left is that liver fat stays at some normal level here, significantly increases when choline is depleted. And then when you put choline back into their diet, that level of fat in the liver decreases again. You can see that markers of liver damage increase in periods of depletion, go back down to normal once you reintroduce choline into the diet, right? So we know here that choline is essential for liver health. And in fact, this is actually what the recommendation, the adequate intake recommendation from the Institute of Medicine is actually based on. Similarly, you can also see markers of muscle dysfunction, right? Creatine phosphokinase, which is a marker of muscle damage, significantly increases when choline is removed from the diet, and then of course goes back to normal once you reintroduce choline into the diet. So we know again that choline is essential for overall muscle health. And this forms the basis for the EFSA claims for choline that stand currently. There are 3 currently approved EFSA claims, although a couple more are sort of in the hopper, and we're hoping for some news at some point soon, hopefully. Anyone that has friends in EFSA, please tell them to move along. But things around normal lipid metabolism and overall liver function are what are currently approved by EFSA as we stand today. So with all these great benefits of choline, certainly we must be getting enough in our diet, right? So we, as we mentioned a couple times before, choline is an essential nutrient, does have an adequate intake set by the Institute of Medicine, which came out in 1998 for our friends who are in the European Union. It also does have a DRV value, which is established in the mid-2010s-ish. Choline is found in a variety of foods, although beef liver probably is not one that most people consume, at least I don't. But your primary source is going to be things like eggs and other meat products, right? Chicken breast, ground beef, etc. But largely it's not found in foods that are really sort of widely consumed, in at least the American diet. So as a result, what does the overall intake of choline look like across the US population? Well, on average, just about 6% of adult women and just about 11% of adult men in the US get enough choline in their diet from food, beverages, and dietary supplements. So large portions of the population are not getting enough. One reason is because, as I mentioned before, I mean, some of those foods that we had mentioned are not ones that are necessarily, that are somewhat calorie rich, right? And so even if you're someone who is really looking to try and consume, a really healthy diet, some of those foods are not necessarily compatible with that. According to the dietary guidelines for Americans, even if you're someone who's following a, quote, healthy US style food pattern, by sticking to those guidelines religiously, you are not going to get enough choline in your diet. It's just very, very challenging. And when you look overall at sort of the average content of choline within specific meals in the US diet, if you could take sort of the average American's breakfast or lunch or dinner and sort of whip it up into a blender and then slap a nutrition or supplement facts panel on it, what would that look like? On average, I mean, most meals are providing less than 20% of the daily value of choline overall. Or in the case of snacks, less than 10%, so virtually nothing. And on average, we're getting about 60%, not even 2/3 of our requirement for choline. And dietary supplement intake, unfortunately, has very little impact on overall choline inadequacy. I mean, when you look at these two graphs, you can see the percentage of people that are consuming above the AI, so in this case, higher is good, is not really different when you account for dietary supplements. And the reason is, I mean, not a lot of dietary supplements have enough choline. If you look according to the Dietary Supplement Labeling Database, which comes out from the Office of Dietary Supplements, you can see that just 5% of overall multivitamin and mineral products even have any amount of choline in them or listed on the supplement facts panel in any quantity. And then when you look at what that quantity is, the median amount is less than 10% of the daily value, just 38 milligrams. So very, very little. 75% of products contain 55 milligrams or less. So very little. There's a lot of room. But that's a tragedy because choline does offer a lot of specific benefits in this area when you look, for example, at nutrient content claims. As we had mentioned before, choline is an essential nutrient, and in 2016, the FDA did provide a reference daily intake value, so meaning that you are eligible to make percent daily value claims, which means that you are then eligible to make claims like good source, excellent source, and high potency, for example, the nutrient content claims. There's a lot of different advantages that you can get, not only in terms of structure function claims for choline, but also around nutrient content claim messaging. So really, really versatile product as well for labeling and claims. So what do I want you to walk away with? Just a couple key points here. Just remember, number one, that choline is an essential nutrient and it provides multiple benefits for adults seeking optimal performance. It's essential for brain health. It's been shown to improve nervous system activation and improve performance on e-gaming applications, specifically things like reaction time and accuracy. Choline is essential for muscle control and maintaining healthy tissue. It's been shown to improve spatial coordination of hand and arm movements. Again, just another way of sort of talking about those benefits in an e-gaming application, right? Choline is essential for metabolic health. We know that the essentiality of choline is based on the role that choline plays in transporting fat outside the liver, right? It's a key component of our overall fat metabolism process. Still, very few Americans and Europeans, frankly, get enough, or Canadians, or pretty much everywhere around the world, get enough choline in their diet. Just 6% of women and 11% of men in the United States get enough choline in the diet. And it does have an RDI, which allows you to make those nutrient content claims to help your messaging on your products. So with that, I thank you for your time, and I'll turn it back over to Miss Natasha for Q&A.
Thank you so much there, both of you, for that great presentation. So now let's take a few questions from our audience. So our first question, besides during pregnancy and breastfeeding, are there any other times during a person's life when choline intakes are particularly important?
I would argue, I mean, choline is an essential nutrient, so it's going to be critical that you consume enough choline from essentially birth until later in life. I mean, the need for choline never stops. That's sort of the definition of essential. That means that everyone needs it effectively at all times. And again, I mean, in another universe, I would love to spend another half hour talking about some of the great stuff we've got on the benefits of choline during pregnancy. But I'm sure if you reach out to myself and Tom, we can help with that.
Yeah, sure. Thank you for that.
I might weigh in very quickly, Natasha, and
Yeah,
just say that one of the particular areas, as we think about high demand, obviously we talked about pregnancy. That's a very high demand time for choline, but also, it's estrogen dependent, and that's really where a lot of this strong production is kicked up during pregnancy. The reverse happens during menopause. So very often, a woman's ability to produce endogenously choline really does go down postmenopausally. So that's another time where we definitely see, transitions from one phase to another may increase the need for choline at a particular time.
Thank you both. And really great question there coming in from our audience. Please keep them coming. We've actually got another one come in. How is choline bitartrate, not sure if I pronounced that correctly, different from other forms of choline like phosphatidylcholine? Help me out there, guys.
Yeah, I think probably the biggest difference is when we speak about choline bitartrate, choline chloride, or choline dihydrogen citrate, which is another salt form, these are all known as salts. So they're very easily dissolved and just, they really break down very quickly within the system to then allow free choline to be produced and provided for the body to use as it sees fit. Some of the other, among phosphatidylcholine, which is one of the ones you mentioned, there's also a couple of others, alpha GPC choline and citicholine, which are bound forms. So they tend to be a little bit lower in terms of overall choline content, And I would say probably the other biggest difference is that there are additional enzymatic steps that need to take place during digestion to get the release of that choline. So you may actually see slower release, but generally you're going to also see less payload in terms of the amount of choline that's being delivered for a lot of those forms.
Okay, perfect. Thank you. We actually have our next question. It's from Angelica. And Angelica asks, from a stability, sensory, and bioavailability perspective, which food or beverage or supplement formats are best and actually worst to include VitaCholine?
That's a very good question. I think it's really appropriate and works quite well in a lot of different formats. I think one of the challenges that we see is that choline, especially at higher concentrations, is what we call hygroscopic, meaning it loves to attract water. So some of the higher choline cation content forms are a little bit more difficult to work with in powder formats, for example. That's where a choline bitartrate shines. It's actually about 40% choline by weight and works quite well in supplement form. From a sensory perspective, choline in the tartaric form, the bitartrate form, can sometimes have an impact in imparting a slight sour taste, but there's really a lot of ways to control that. I talked earlier about our VitaSure brand. We actually have what we call VitaCholine B90, which is an encapsulated version. So for a lot of different applications, such as bars, that would be entirely appropriate without any sort of impact on sensory. As far as beverage applications and a lot of other food applications, choline chloride is about 74% and really can be used in any sort of a liquid matrix. So if you're doing a beverage or any type of a fat matrix, such as a protein powder, choline chloride can really work quite well in those. And again, provide a very high amount of choline by weight in a format where the hygroscopic nature of choline really has very little impact. So we've seen that, for example, in milks. Choline chloride is quite heavily used. It's been used in kids' products such as applesauce, nut butters, I think, puffs for younger kids. There are numerous applications where it really can work. So I wouldn't say there's necessarily a format that's worst or best. It's just that there's a solution that's more appropriate to one or the other. And that's something we can help with. I don't know, Eric, if you want to comment on the bioavailability.
Yeah, I'd also add, we're fortunate that the bioavailability of choline, both choline chloride and CBT, the choline bitartrate, are effectively equivalent between one another and have actually been shown to be very similar to phosphatidylcholine from eggs, for example, and even some of the other products like alpha GPC that are out there. So as Tom mentioned, the other benefit too is that relatively higher payload. So you get a lot of sort of bioavailability bang for your buck, as it were, with the various SKUs under the VitaCholine brand. So it's from a bioavailability perspective quite amenable to more applications.
Brilliant. Thank you both. And thank you for that question, Angelica. It's great to learn about its applications. We've actually got another one coming in now. If choline is such a critical nutrient, why don't more people know about it? That's a great one.
Eric, I'll toss that one over to you. I think.
I was going to say, oh man, I feel like everyone's got their pet theory on this. I think one thing, in fairness to choline, right? I mentioned that this was only established as essential in 1998, so it's young, right? I mean, it's effectively 25 years old, right? Take that and compare that to thiamine, which has been around for 112 years now, right? So the other nutrients have something of a head start, right? Vitamin C has been described since the 1790s, for God's sake. So, it's not necessarily, time is not on its side, I guess is what I'm trying to say. So that's one reason. Choline is also sort of in this kind of the other bucket. I mean, it's not a vitamin, it's not a mineral, it's sort of somewhere in the middle there, I guess. So people have a hard time on trying to define exactly sort of where it sits. And I know that sounds silly, but I think, people like simple buckets. But I mean, the fact of the matter is that the awareness of it really is growing. I mean, even just in the last, not even 10 years now, you've seen the FDA establish that RDI, as I had mentioned. So it, is now part of that sort of labeling royal family, as it were. Major groups like AMA and ACOG, March of Dimes, dietary guidelines even have made pretty strongly worded statements about the importance of choline. So, we are in a fortunate position here, Tom and myself. I mean, I'm trying to really build that awareness, and it has been growing. And I'd like to say certainly Tom has been around in this game longer than I have, and can say, just leaps and bounds change versus say 10 years ago. But the work's not done. So I don't know, Tom, if you have anything you want to add about that.
Yeah, I think you really hit the nail on the head when you described the how to categorize it. I think without getting into all the specifics around what makes a vitamin, really choline does check most of the boxes. It doesn't fit one particular requirement that classifies things as a vitamin, but it's been evaluated along with all of the B vitamins and is traditionally associated with the B vitamins. So I think the breakthrough really was in 2016. So even as you think about, yes, notified as an essential nutrient or categorized as an essential nutrient in 1998, but then 2016, when the FDA provided for it on labeling, that's really where it begins to, I think, enter the consciousness of consumers, because that provides for labeling, it provides for comparison across different formats. For those of you on the call who are not aware, it is a mandatory labeling for supplements. If it's above 2%, you do need to include it in the supplement facts box, and you do need to list the percent daily value. So I think as we see more products including choline, it's going to become much more prevalent, and certainly the awareness is going to grow. I think the other thing that's very interesting is even in the statement in 2016 when the FDA basically said, hey, we've got enough evidence to really give this an RDI, they were specific in saying in their labeling, choline is really viewed as a vitamin. And so they list it in the supplement facts box after pantothenic acid, one of the last vitamins, and before calcium, one of the first minerals. So it really has kind of fallen into that area now, where I think most of us view it as it's an essential nutrient, very vitamin-like. And I think that's only going to grow based upon a lot of the things Eric has brought attention to, which is a lot more authorities, including the dietary guidelines for Americans. It's very rare that an agency like the dietary guidelines comes out and says, hey, you really need to think about supplementing during pregnancy if you're not getting enough of this nutrient, because it's so hard to get through the diet. So I think those are the kind of things that will probably bring it much more to the forefront. And that's in some ways really what's kept it from having greater awareness now.
That's brilliant, Bo. Thank you. I'm sure that will really interest everyone to hear about that and the awareness. That's really key. Thank you both. And our next question, it sounds like meat, fish, and dairy are some of the best food sources of choline. Do vegetarians and vegans have a difficult time getting enough choline?
Oh, 100%. I mean, I think, in that, the slide that I showed earlier with the different food sources, I mean, eggs and chicken and beef are probably the three most commonly consumed ones. I mean, there is choline and things like soy, but nevertheless, it's still challenging. So even in the sort of, if you remember, I showed that thing about the healthy U.S. food style pattern. So, on average, even if you're sort of following the rules of a healthy diet, you're still not going to get enough choline. And I want to say it was about, you'd get about roughly, let's call it 85% or so. I forget the exact number now. If you're following a healthy vegetarian pattern, so, really sticking to the sort of rules on that, you'd only be getting about 70% of the choline that you need in your diet overall. So the bar just gets that much higher to try and get enough choline in your diet if you're a vegetarian. So for sure, if you're thinking about formulating products or creating something targeted towards vegetarians, choline, I think, is a really, really important addition to that, because it's incredibly difficult to get enough choline in your diet. Just if you're an omnivore, and if you're a vegetarian, again, it's just that much harder to sort of meet the threshold.
Yeah,
Thank you.
definitely. I think that I think that as you look at it's definitely possible with a vegan or vegetarian eating pattern. It's definitely possible to do, but you have to make active plans to do so. We've done some dietary modeling in the past. Things like wheat germ are fairly high content, so including that in the breakfast. A lot of cruciferous vegetables, legumes. You really have to consume pretty significant quantities, but it's definitely something you can do. But I think that's why we see, I talked earlier about, a plant-based milk for kids, Ripple. I think that's why you're seeing choline being beefed up there, because everyone's aware that if you're following a plant-based diet, it can be much more of a challenge. So getting supplemental choline through a product that's added it in is just a great way to be able to do it in the diet while still following that, vegetarian or vegan dietary pattern.
Actually,
Wonderful.
case in
Thank
point,
you.
one last point on that, sorry.
Yeah, of course. Go ahead.
So for those of you who are sort of following these news, this bits of news is that the FDA recently released a draft guidance on voluntary labeling standards for plant-based milks, for example. And within the text of that, they do talk about choline and the importance of it. And they specifically mention that choline inadequacy is a, quote, public health challenge. And it's particularly prevalent among those that are following the vegetarian diet. So even this is something that the FDA recognizes as specifically challenging for vegetarians who are likely to consume things like plant-based milk. So again, this is something that if you are a vegetarian, it is very challenging, and looking for fortified or supplemental options is something that's really important. Sorry, that's it.
No, that's perfect. Thank you. No, don't apologize. It's great to learn more. Thank you. And one other question. I've heard that some forms of choline don't cross the blood-brain barrier. Does VitaCholine?
So there's a lot of data out. So there's a lot of ways you can sort of tell that functionally and sort of biochemically, I suppose. So functionally, when we showed the data, for example, in that earlier study looking at the pupil size assessment, which was something of a surrogate biomarker for choline and cholinergic activation, number one. So that's one way you can tell. The second is there's actually some older data as well looking at choline supplementation in healthy volunteers, and you can see that the amount of choline-containing compounds in the brain increases shortly thereafter as well. So it would have to, of course, pop past the blood-brain barrier to get in there. So there are data to show that the brain does, in fact, take up choline from sources like choline bitartrate, for example. Yes, for sure, absolutely, you can see that there's both functionally and biochemically there are some data to demonstrate that.
Wonderful, thank you. I know that DHA, this person asks, is good for brain health. So if I'm already supplementing with omega-3 fatty acids, why do I need choline?
So a couple things to consider there. Number one is that, as we mentioned, choline is an essential nutrient. I mean, it's essential for the brain to function. DHA is not, although it is very important still. So that's one thing to consider. Two is that DHA, as we mentioned earlier, choline has that role in transporting fats around the body. So one of those fats is DHA. Choline binds to, as phosphatidylcholine, binds to DHA, enters chylomicrons, and then, or VLDL rather, and then travels throughout the bloodstream to do the things that it needs to do. So there's actually a couple different studies. One was just released last year, as a matter of fact, in pregnant women, showing that pregnant women who consumed choline plus DHA actually improved their DHA status, so their blood circulating levels of DHA, better than just consuming choline, or excuse me, better than just consuming DHA alone. So they work in a very synergistic way, in a sense, right? I mean, that choline is required to move that DHA around the body. So having enough choline is critical to make sure that you're getting sort of the most out of the DHA that you're getting in your diet from supplemental sources or otherwise.
Wonderful. Thank you so much there, Eric. Well, that's actually all we have time for today. If we weren't able to answer your question, we'll aim to follow up with you directly after the webinar. An exit survey will pop up after the webinar, and we'd really appreciate it if you could take just a few moments to give us your feedback on this event. Thanks so much and have a good day. Goodbye.